Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming on a Friday evening. Truly impressed with the number of you who have showed up. And momentarily, we will have what promises to be an outstanding presentation by an outstanding and exceptional world-renowned scholar. We are truly privileged and honored to have with us now our friend and colleague, Dr. Al-Azm. But before that, we have one thing to take care of. As all of you know, as part of our conference, we have a distinguished delegation from Shanghai International Studies University from China. This relationship has been a very rich relationship. I had the honor of visiting Shanghai. And since then, this relationship has grown by leaps and bounds. And we have 4 very distinguished scholars from Shanghai who are visiting us. And what we thought jointly is that for the first time, the Middle East Institute, which is one of the most distinguished scholarly centers for study of Middle East in China, will sign an agreement tonight in front of you with the Central and Southwest Asian Studies Center at the University of Montana. So the signing ceremony will take place in a moment after I have asked my distinguished friend and colleague, Dr. Zhao Chen from the Department of Modern and Classical Languages and Literatures at the University of Montana. Without this gentleman, without his commitment, none of this would have been possible. I told him tonight that Zhao has really served as a bridge between us and China, and without you, Zhao, none of this would have been possible. So the microphone is all yours.
Thank you, everybody. In June 2011, Dr. Merida Kia led a delegation, UN delegation, it's a 3-member delegation to China, and we visited 3 universities, and one of them is Shanghai International Studies University, which is a very prestigious university. And for languages alone, they teach 37 different languages. They have trained lots of diplomats, translators, interpreters, and all kinds of professionals in internationalism. And the alumni of SISU includes a lot of very well-known personnel in China, probably not only in China, but around the world, include our First Lady, and 1 Deputy Prime Minister, 2 foreign ministers, and 30-some ambassadors to different countries around the world, including 2 ambassadors to US. The current Chinese ambassador to US is from SISU, and his name is Cui Tiankai. And very interesting, as I mentioned yesterday, that the current American ambassador to China is from Missoula. And so it's very interesting. So during that visit, we established lots of relationships and started a lot of programs with SISU, such as a student exchange program, programs with SISU's law school and the School of Journalism and their MBA center, and among which one of the very important one is our relationship with the Middle East Research Institute. And since 2011, as Dr. Merida Kia mentioned, the development takes leaps and bounds, and we have all kinds of activities going on since then. We have been involved in each other's research and conferences, of course, and this is a very good example. And this is the 5th year for the SISU delegation to be involved in our conference. And in 2012, we sent a delegation over there. And this coming September, Dr. Merida Kia is going to lead another delegation to attend CISU's conference. And then, well, we also have been involved in each other's publication. And as I said, we're also research. And Dr. Kia was invited to serve on the editorial board of their magazines. Well, that Middle East Research Center has two very well-known magazines. One is in Chinese and the other is in English. And Dr. Kia is a member of the editorial board. And also our faculty, such as Professor Samir Bitta, who has been publishing in those magazines. And so it's with a great pleasure, let me introduce our colleague, Dr. De Sun. As I mentioned a few years ago, he was the rising star. And well, he's still rising, but he's now very high in the sky. And he brought with him his student. Yeah, Miss Wang. Well, so, and also Professor Gaffa and Professor Wang. Yeah, with no more further ado, let me introduce our colleague, De Gonsen. Yeah, the microphone is yours.
Thank you so much. And first of all, on behalf of our CISU delegation, I would like to extend our sincere appreciation to Mahad Kia for your great invitation and hospitality, so that I feel at home in the beautiful city of Missoula and the University of Montana. Actually, our home university, Shanghai International Study University, has established a partnership with University of Montana. And since 2011, our Middle East Study Institute and Central and Southwest Asian Study Center have formed very close tie relations in publications of our journal. And also, in the past 5 years, we have sent 5 delegations from CISU to attend our annual meeting here. We feel very delighted, so that we decide we should establish a partnership based on friendship and brotherhood. Today, we are witnessing the very important ceremony of signing agreement. I wish today is the new beginning, and I wish our cooperation will be everlasting. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So today is the new beginning. We cannot forget our go-between, a very important bridge, Professor Cao, who has served as the bridge connecting our two institutes, to express our gratitude on behalf of our university leadership. I would like to send Professor Cao a small gift as the token of our gratitude. Thank you so much. Thank you. And also, we would like to send our partner a very small gift. Also, with the token of our friendship and gratitude.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you all. Thank you.
Please. Congratulations. It's all Samir's.
Assalamu alaikum أيها السيدات والسادة. Shalom, حاضرين بحضرات. Peace be upon you, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. أهلا وسهلا. Thank you all for coming to be with us on this lovely four-season Montana evening. I have the honor and privilege of being here tonight with you to introduce our distinguished speaker, Dr. Al-Azm. And before I do that, I would like to do some housekeeping. First and foremost, I would like to thank all my colleagues from the center for all their hard work. And I would like to express sincere thanks to all our presenters who have traveled from vast distances to bring us knowledge and enlighten us to their areas of expertise. Please join me in giving a big hand to all our presenters. And of course, I will have to thank all our supporters and the people who make us and give us the ability to bring all of us together on such a lovely evening. First, I would like to thank the Office of the President, and I would like to thank the Office of the Provost and our dear co-sponsors, the Mansfield Center, the Department of Modern and Classical Languages, the Department of History, and most of all, thank you for being with us. Tonight's presentation is going to be very fascinating and highly interesting. We are blessed to have Dr. Al-Azm with us. He was educated in the United Kingdom, reading the archaeology of Western Asiatics at the University College London, and graduated with a doctoral degree in 1991. He is the Director of Scientific and Conservative Laboratories at the General Department of Antiquities and Museums from 1999 to 2004. He also taught at the University of Damascus until 2006. From 2006 to 2009, he became a visiting assistant professor at Brigham Young University. Currently, he is an associate professor of Middle East history and anthropology at Shawnee State University in Ohio. While he's working in Syria, Dr. Al-Azm was a first-hand observer and sometime participant of the reform processes instigated by Bashar al-Assad, thus gaining insights into how they were enacted and why more often than not they failed. Furthermore, he is an outspoken member of the senior opposition and a keen follower and commentator on current events in Syria and the Middle East in general. He has appeared as a Syria expert on leading television networks, including CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, PBS, and his voice can be heard regularly on NPR. He has written articles in numerous journals and major media outlets, including guest editorials for the New York Times and Time magazine. Dr. Al-Azm is a founder and board member of the Day After Project and currently coordinates the Heritage Protection Initiative for Cultural Heritage Protection. He's also a member of the Assure Cultural Heritage Initiatives team. And since I've met him, I've been working on a list of vocabulary to help me introduce him better next time. Please help me to give him a big Montana welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Samir, for this introduction. It's going to be a hard act to follow. And speaking of four seasons, you're quite right. It took me 4 hours to figure out whether to put my coat on or take it off or put something warm or... Indeed. Well, thank you all for attending this talk. And I'm unfortunately not here to bring you a happy story, although I will try and leave you with maybe a lighter ending when I come to conclusion of my talk. You're all aware that Syria is undergoing a very traumatic experience at the moment. And does this work? Let's see. Yeah, there we are. Syria is going through a very traumatic experience. Right now there is for all intents and purposes, a civil war raging through the country that has ruptured Syrian society across every possible cleavage. And as a result of that, the scale of destruction, the humanitarian catastrophe that is essentially occurring right now in Syria is almost unprecedented. Ban Ki-moon was not exaggerating when he said that we have not seen a humanitarian catastrophe on this scale since the end of the Second World War, and I would add since the breakup of India and to India and Pakistan and Bangladesh. Just reflect on the fact that Syria's population is 23 million, and today 50% of that population has been displaced, both internally and externally. It is a catastrophe of unprecedented magnitude. So with all this in mind, I've been asked before, how can you worry about stones? How is it that you're worrying about culture? How is it that you're worrying about history when there is this terrible catastrophe that you see in front of you? Shouldn't you be more concerned about the welfare of people? Shouldn't you be more concerned about helping the refugees, or helping with the war effort, or wherever it is you are? And it's almost that we are forced into a binary. You either care about people or you care about culture and buildings. I reject this binary, because for me, you can't have one or the other. It is not an either-or situation. At the end of the day, the two are intermingled. The people and their history are one. For me to separate the two would be like creating a nonsensical situation. What are a people without their history? They're nothing. They're lost. And what is a history? What is the culture? What are the buildings? What are the monuments? Without the people they represent, they're dead. They're just stones, and they're meaningless. So for me, it's both at the same time. And unless you save both, then all is lost. This is nowhere more important and pertinent than when I consider that this history really forms a part of what makes a Syrian a Syrian. It is part of our national identity. And moreover, it is also important to both sides. I can tell you right now that even as Syrian society has ruptured across all these possible cleavages, even though the country has become so polarized between regime, pro-regime and anti-regime, yet there are people on both sides of this divide today dying, trying to save this cultural heritage. And for me, that is really important, because it shows that this shared common history can also act as a bridge for the future. One day this conflict is going to end. And when it does end, how are Syrians going to get back together again? What is it that's going to help them reach out across this divide to be able to speak to each other once again? It's going to be these little common shared points that are going to help us to do this. So for me, there can be no post-conflict reconciliation and stabilization without this shared common history. And that makes saving Syria's cultural heritage even more important than just simply rejecting the binary I just proposed to you. For me, protecting and preserving Syria's history and heritage is also about safeguarding Syria's future too. Now, I usually do this at the end of my talk, but I decided to flip it and do it at the beginning, just to kind of get you going. Another point that I want to share with you is the fact that Syria is up there with the best Syria has 6 World Heritage Sites. 6 World Heritage Sites designated so by UNESCO. And all 6 have been damaged by the conflict. And just so that you're aware, that is more World Heritage Sites than even Egypt has, although they're catching us up pretty fast. But I mean, when you think of the scale, it's incredible. Every Syrian lives either on top of an archaeological site, right next door to an archaeological site, or within a stone's throw of an archaeological site. That is how closely connected we are with our cultural heritage, whether we like it or not. And so, when in 2011, the Arab Spring reached Syria in March 2015, and the first protests went out, these were all peaceful protests. Mainly it was civil society, civilian activism, and they were met with the most terrible repressive measures by the regime. And that is history, and we're all aware of it. But by the end of 2011 and the beginning of 2012, a major change occurred. The nature of the conflict shifted to one of armed confrontation between regime and opposition. And that is when cultural heritage became a casualty of war as well. It was no longer just innocent people dying. It was no longer just civilians being mown down by a regime. Now, cultural heritage was being systematically destroyed too, along with the people that it was supposed to be part of, their culture and their history. The principal causes for this destruction are not difficult to recognize and see. At the top of the list is the almost immediate, right as soon as it turns into an armed conflict, there's an almost immediate uptick, rise in extensive looting of archaeological sites in Syria. All over the country, as the regime contracted, as the state structures began to crumble, as the country was descending increasingly into a state of civil war, the day-to-day means by which people could earn a living, feed their families, were also disappearing. People could no longer go to work. Factories closed down. Schools shut out. Businesses were burnt out. And people were left with no other way to feed themselves, feed their families, except to start to go back to these sites that they live on top of, they live next door to, and to begin to loot them. And we call this subsistence looting, opportunistic looting. In addition to the pre-existing mafias and criminal activity or criminal organizations that have always traditionally dealt with looted antiquities, and these exist in all countries all over the world. But now you had that, the situation was compounded by this opportunistic looting as well. In addition to that, many of these sites became part of the battleground. So we had actual combat going in and around these archaeological sites, and that was also causing grievous damage to the cultural heritage. This is a famous satellite image of a very important site in Syria called Apamea. It is a Hellenistic site, and it is very well known. Some of the most beautiful mosaics have come from there. It was originally established by the Seleucids, by Seleucus, who is one of the generals of Alexander the Great, and he named it after his wife. It is also famous for one of the longest Cardo Maximuses, this long straight road here, which stretches, it's the longest Cardo Maximus in the world, in the entire world. It is around 1.2 miles long, or 2 kilometers long. 1 year later, just 1 year later, ladies and gentlemen, look at this. This is 1 year of looting. 1 year. This is not as a result of shells or artillery. This is looting. These are looting pits. And we know, because we verify these, we have teams on the ground who go in and they try to verify this information. I can tell you that every one of these holes is something between 9 and 15 feet across and over 10 feet deep. These are not little potholes that you can cover up with a little shovel. This site is finished. There's nothing left. And if you look at the 2015 images, you'll see that the looting has spread way beyond this road here. It's totally destroyed. Again, the Crac de Chevalier, another World Heritage Site. A Crusader castle, one of the world's best preserved Crusader castles. Anyone who knows anything about the Crusades would recognize the Crac. And here you can see the results of a regime airstrike. The Crac was occupied by opposition forces in 2012 and right up to 2013, and the regime basically was trying to dislodge them. Naturally, it's a fortress, it's sited in a very strategic point, and obviously the opposition occupied it and the regime was trying to dislodge them, and they were using airstrikes to knock them out. The citadel and the castle walls suffered grievously in the continuous assaults until the opposition withdrew from there. The same with Aleppo Citadel, another World Heritage Site, the ancient city of Aleppo, with its imposing citadel right on top of it. And here you can see the wall where it crumbled. This time it was a regime sniper. This is in a regime-held area. This high ground is held by the regime. It overlooks the old city, and there was a sniper's nest up here. Last spring, the opposition managed to locate the nest, and they dropped a mortar shell on it. It was too much for the walls, and they collapsed. And then even museums are not safe. This is the Mara Museum. It is in the province of Idlib. It is a small regional museum, but it holds one of the most important collections of mosaics from another group of sites designated as World Heritage Sites, the Dead Cities. And these are all kept in the galleries. Last summer, June 15th, the regime dropped a barrel bomb on the museum. And there you see the damage to the museum. And you can see here the mosaic, the remnants of a mosaic, all smashed up. There it is. And you can see the grievous damage that the building suffered from the barrel bomb. The city had been repeatedly bombed for the last year almost. So it was inevitable, and we knew that this was coming. We knew that at some point the museum was going to get hit. And so the local archaeologists, activists, museum curators, working with us, we managed to actually save the contents of the museum because we sandbagged it. That is what we do. This is our effort, and not my personal effort. This is the effort of those men and women inside who are working under these kinds of conditions, trying to save this cultural heritage. Because they were able to sandbag the museum, I can tell you that none of the all the mosaics inside the galleries that were sandbagged, which were all the important ones, the main ones, were all saved. No damage came to them. In fact, a week later, the caravanserai, Khan Asad Pasha, across the street from it, was also struck with another airstrike. So it's not a one-off. That area is regularly targeted. And then we have the final, if you want, insult to be heaped on Syria's cultural heritage. The deliberate and punitive destruction, and in addition to looting. And this latest threat comes from, you all know, ISIS, or otherwise known as the Islamic State. Today, I mean, this is at the height of their expansion, as you can see, they covered a very wide area. And in that area, it is an area very rich in archaeological sites and cultural heritage. And it's important for you to remember that as I go through the next few slides. First thing you should bear in mind is that ISIS did not invent looting. ISIS came upon a pre-existing situation of looting. As you saw from the slides, looting was ongoing even before ISIS took over. ISIS first took over Raqqa in the end of the summer of 2013. And by 2014, they had essentially spread right across both Syria and Iraq at a lightning speed, taking over Mosul, Raqqa, and all that territory in between. In an initial fast expansion period, ISIS looked around and saw this looting and realized it was highly lucrative. And so they said, fine, you loot, but you're going to have to pay a tax. So the decision was made to charge a 20% tax on any sale of looted antiquities. That was the requirement. And they would issue looters with licenses in lieu, and I'll show you the licenses, in lieu of their activity. In effect, ISIS institutionalized the action of looting. They institutionalized it. They basically, they declared themselves, I mean, their name is the state. That's what we call them in Arabic, Daesh ad-Dawla, meaning the state. And they see themselves as the state. They institutionalized the act of looting, and they taxed it, and they issued licenses for it. And then, in the second phase, spring, summer of 2014, they begin to accelerate this process. They begin to intensify the process. We start to see them bringing in contractors. They hire out sectors. They begin to introduce machinery, heavy earth-moving machinery into the process, and all of which they were renting out. So you're a prospector, you're a looter, you come to ISIS, you say, I want to dig area X. They'll say, well, what do you need? And you'll say, well, I need maybe a couple of diggers and a few, and a half a dozen men to work with me. No problem. But now your fee is gone up to 30% or 40%. It was negotiable. And then the third phase we see coming in the fall, winter of 2014, and this is when it really becomes aggressive. And particularly after the coalition airstrikes begin, because most of these are going to target their oil industry and their other activities. So increasingly, looting cultural heritage becomes more important as a source of revenue, and they begin to rely on it more and more. We know from the evidence we have that ISIS controls the sale of looted antiquities and the dispersal and the movement. They control the entire process from beginning to end. And it's a very lucrative one. And because they're involved at every stage, they're able to raise income from it, from almost every stage. It's very important for you to understand how intrinsically linked the looting of antiquities and revenue raising for ISIS are. We know that ISIS considers looted antiquities important enough to give it an office of its own. This is the, it says here, Qism al-Athar, Wilayat Halab, the Department of Archaeology, province of Aleppo. And you can see it there. And then above it, you can see it says Diwan al-Rikaz, the Office of Resources. They didn't put it under the Ministry of Culture. They didn't put it under the Ministry of History or, tourism. They put it under the office, Diwan al-Rikaz, Resources, because they see cultural heritage as an exploitable resource. You loot to sell, to make money, you license. They have regular auctions in the city of Raqqa for this looted material. And every city, every major town has an office like this. This one happens to be in the city of Manbij, close to the Turkish borders, a major hub for the looting and sale of antiquities. There's a license. And you can see it says, permission is given to brother, and obviously redacted name, to dig for antiquities in the village of, and again the name is removed, and it's conditional. There is a condition. Conditional, شريطة عدم إيذاء المسلمين. Conditional that you do not harm Muslims. And then it is signed by Abu Qasura, who's the head of the Manbij office, and you can see the official stamp there. Today we can actually match items that have been looted, that have been associated with a specific license, that are then sold at the auction. And be aware that any item sold at the auction, ISIS gets paid up front. There's no sale or return. Once it leaves the auction, it's paid for. Anybody who's been to an auction knows that you can't take the stuff out until you pay for it. And then the looting becomes very aggressive. Bulldozers are now moving in. Large amounts of earth are being moved. You can see here the effects of the bulldozing. Look at these pits. This is the top of a mound, a tell near Raqqa. Look at these big pits gouged out, and you can see the tracks. And there's one of those bulldozers digging up an actual grave site. The scale of the destruction now is unstoppable. You can raise an entire tell in a matter of a week. We believe that there are about 15,000 tells, 15,000 archaeological sites in Syria. You do the math. If you can finish a tell a week. And for those of you who are wondering what comes out of these sites, that digger uncovered this hoard. And it's not any hoard. The estimated value of this hoard, and you're only seeing a part of it, is over $100,000. Went to auction, as far as we are aware, sold. Done. All we can do is track. And then in 2015, we have the next terrible event. The darker and more sinister manifestation of ISIS's control and exploitation of cultural heritage. We now see a new face to the exploitation of cultural heritage. I showed you the looting. I showed you the looting part. Now I'm going to show you what they cannot loot, what they do with what they cannot loot. They sell what they can, they loot what they can sell. Well, what do you do with the stuff you cannot sell? This is like, you think of it like a carcass, and you're going to use every single part of that carcass. Meat, bone, sinew, hair, skin, horn, everything. And it's the same for ISIS. ISIS, I cannot repeat this enough, they view cultural heritage as an exploitable resource, and they will exploit everything in it. They loot what they can sell, and what they cannot sell, now they will show us what they're going to do with it. At the end of 2014, we started to receive very disturbing news that the museum in Mosul had been attacked and many of its contents destroyed. And then, sure enough, in February 2015, on the eve of the Bamiyan Buddha's destruction, a video surfaces showing the destruction of the museum in Mosul, rapidly followed by the destruction at Nimrud, the sites of Nimrud and Hatra in Iraq. And then the circus moves on into Syria, because Palmyra had fallen also to ISIS. And we all feared for the great city of Palmyra, because at Palmyra are some of the most iconic, most important symbols of Syria's cultural heritage. So, if ISIS sees cultural heritage as an exploitable resource, why are they destroying it? Now, I know you've all read in the newspaper how this is part of some extremist, radical, fundamentalist Islamic ideology. And if you really get to read the highbrow sort of papers, you might even see the word iconoclast or iconoclastic. But I'm here to tell you that that's not the case. Not when it comes to cultural heritage. The reason why they destroy cultural heritage is because it's a very powerful way to send a very powerful message. It's a propaganda tool. For the same reason that they take a person, prisoners, they put them in orange jumpsuits, and then they have this high-definition video of them, and then they execute them in the most gruesome manner by setting them on fire or drowning them or beheading them. Whilst you have Jihadi John jumping up and down. He's no longer with us anyway, but you know what I'm talking about. It is a huge propaganda show. And for exactly the same reasons that they do these public executions on high-definition videos, and they disseminate them the way they do, they also very publicly destroy cultural heritage. The main purpose of this destruction is to demonstrate two things. One, the ability of ISIS to act with impunity. It is the impunity. I am here, I am ISIS, I can do anything I like and you can do nothing to stop me. And against that is our own impotence that they put in our face. Here I am, I'm going to destroy everything that you hold valuable, and there is nothing you can do about it. You are impotent in front of me. The impotence-impunity combination is a very powerful one, ladies and gentlemen, and it resonates really well with our own narrow base of supporters, and it shocks us. It shocks us so badly that we are paralyzed. We are incapable of action, time and time again. It works. It works. We are incapable of preventing these atrocities. They know it, and they use it. So, they destroy statues. They don't care. There are plenty more where those came from. They do it to intimidate the local population, to show them, I can take anything I want from your homes, from your gardens, from your museums, and I will destroy them in front of you. They will visit the temple of Baal Shamin at Palmyra, a small temple, not very important. Nevertheless, an important structure in Palmyra, and they do this to it. What did we do? What was our reaction? Shock, horror, paralysis, screaming. I think I must have done 15 interviews in less than 24 hours, talking to every news agency. And everybody's wringing their hands. So what does ISIS do? It says, brilliant, we've got them. This is it, let's do the next one. Within a few days, bam, Temple of Bel. The Temple of Bel, ladies and gentlemen. What saddens me most about the Temple of Bel and the loss of the Temple of Bel is that you will never experience what I experienced. There's the temple before, whoops. There's the temple before, and as you see, it's gone. You've never been to the Temple of Bel. It's called the Temple of Bel because he was the sun god. It was the temple of the sun god. The sun would rise from the east, right here. And then if you can see, there's a window there, and there's another window over here. And these windows are strategically positioned. And you come to visit the temple at dawn, and you wait inside this darkened sort of environment, high walls. At one point, it served as a church, and there are still the remnants of the frescoes from the days when it was a church in the Byzantine period. And you stand there, and you wait, and then the sun rises ever so slightly until it hits that point when the rays can break through into that opening. And then, bam, the lights come on, and it's an incredible feeling. You are truly in the presence of the sun god. You can only see, I can describe this to you 100 times, but you will only truly appreciate it if you experience it. And I'm sorry you will never experience it. And I'm even sorry that my children will never experience it. They will never see this. Ever. These photos were brought to us 2 weeks ago by one of our undercover people who work in Palmyra. It's very dangerous to work in Palmyra and anywhere that there are ISIS. They risk their life every day to get us this information. There's the damage from the edge of the wall. And you can see here that is all that is left of the Temple of Bel. From this, that's it. That is all that is left. ISIS does not only destroy monuments, historical buildings, it also destroys places of worship. I know I just told you that ISIS commits these atrocities not for religious reasons. In fact, what they do is they commit the atrocity because they want to commit, because there is a political purpose, there is a propaganda purpose. And then they will find a religious excuse, a religious explanation to justify, to legitimize the atrocity. The legitimization, the religious explanation is added over. It's a layer that comes over the actual atrocity to justify it. But this is different, ladies and gentlemen. When they go after religious institutions, that is religion. You see, ISIS are not stupid. They know that no sane person in Syria today, or in Iraq, or anywhere else for that matter, would actually walk into a museum and kneel in front of the statue of whatever god is being displayed there and start praying to it. They know that. They know that they're not in competition with the ancient gods. But they are in competition with other sects and religions. And so those are destroyed for religious purposes. To understand that, you have to understand how they perceive Islam from their, they have a very narrow perspective of Islam. And it's based on the concept of essentialism. To them, Islam has an essence, a pure essence. And a pure essence that is so powerful, that is represented in the first days when Muhammad and the rightly guided caliphs were around. And somehow over time, this essence got polluted, got corrupted, got changed, got dulled, weakened by these pollutants, which would include schismatic sects, as far as, and I use schismatic here because that's how they see it. I'm not saying that Shiites are schismatics, but that is how they perceive it. So Shiism becomes a pollutant. Any other religious sect becomes a pollutant. Any activity or place of worship, so the tomb of Jonah, for example, as this is the tomb of Jonah, becomes something that needs to be eradicated because it is polluting that pure essence of Islam. They are cleansing it. So that, yes, that has that goes to the heart of their very narrow, very strict, radical, and Wahhabi-like interpretation of Islam. And that has nothing to do with why they destroy archaeological sites. I know I've depressed you, and I do apologize. So I'm going to try and bring you back up again. I'm going to try and revive you. And maybe just share with you some of the things that we are trying to do in closing. You know, I started off by telling you that there are people on both sides of this terrible divide, risking their lives to try and save what they can. Local archaeologists, local activists, museum staff. And there are NGOs, non-governmental organizations, like ourselves, the TDA, the Day After. And there are international organizations, like ASOR, the American School of Oriental Research, who we do a lot of work with. Even international organizations like UNESCO, although UNESCO are a problem. UNESCO really can only work with state institutions, so they can only work with the regime side, even though the regime only controls 30% of the country. So what about the remaining 70% of the culture? Unfortunately, it's left down to us, and we get very little support, I can tell you. We're just out there on our own. And we also do some work with law enforcement agencies. The TDA itself was established to help support these men and women. They're the heroes of my story, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not the hero. I'm doing fine. I live here. I have a job. I go to university. I teach. I come talk to you. The heroes of my story are the men and women inside Syria today, risking their lives to save this heritage. And our job is to try and help them organize, provide resources for them. Provide an institutional framework for them to support them as non-state actors, because organizations like UNESCO won't touch them. Help them work on preserving, documenting, saving, tracking, looting, everything that we can do. And as part of this work, we established the Site Monitors Project in the spring of 2015. And these young men and women go around archaeological sites, openly where they can, secretly where they are not allowed to. And they try and get us all this information that I'm sharing with you today. And I can tell you that there's a lot more, unfortunately, I'm unable to share for reasons more to do with the safety of the people that are out there, especially in the areas under ISIS control. And we produce regular reports which are published on the website of ASOR, of State Department, and our own website. This is an example of one of our reports that we bring out. This is a report on a Russian airstrike on one of the dead cities, a World Heritage, UNESCO World Heritage designated site. It caused a lot of damage to the site. I sent this report immediately, literally 3 days after I sent it to UNESCO. I said, you need to see this. 2 days after that, UNESCO issued a note of condemnation. It condemned parties that were bombing archaeological sites. Parties? What parties? There's only one party. There are only two people with airplanes up there in the air. It's either the Russians or the regime. The coalition doesn't do that. I mean, we do other things, but we don't do that. So we track looted items. This is one collection out of Deir ez-Zor, ISIS-held territory. This went up for sale, $250,000. This one collection. Looted mosaics. I track looted mosaics all the time. I just came back from Turkey 2 weeks ago, tracking a group of mosaics. Right now, there's a German buyer waiting on the border trying to buy 5 relief statues from Palmyra. Again, we're tracking them. But all we can do is track. We're not law enforcement agents. We cannot get involved in that. It's not our job. And we protect museums. This photo here, this is a photo about 10 days old. They're trying to move these mosaics into some of the storerooms to protect them in case another barrel bomb drops on their museum. And I leave you with a photo of some of the people that I would like to honor in this action. I can tell you that this young man over here now does not have, he has only half a lung left because his house received a chlorine gas bomb dropped by the regime, burnt his lungs out, that of his children and his wife. These are the risks these people operate under. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Al-Azm. I'd like to ask another gentleman, a good friend of ours that has been very kind to host our distinguished speaker, to come up to the microphone and share a few words with you. Please, Tom.
My name is Tom Lee. Back in the 1980s and 90s, when I was an adjunct in religious studies here, teaching courses in Bible and biblical languages, I had the opportunity to participate in a number of excavations in the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. But in 1983, I had the experience of spending a summer in Syria. I mean, that's 30 years ago. And the places that you've seen tonight, I've been there. With emotion. Amr talked about standing in the Temple of Bel at Palmyra at dawn. I know what he's talking about. and it's not there anymore. And so I very much appreciate his presence with us this week and the opportunity he's had to share this story with us. And to salute the work that he and his colleagues on the ground in Syria are doing daily, trying to do what they can to preserve what's left. In escorting him around Missoula the last couple of days, he's inseparable from his cell phone, his iPhone, because he's in continual contact with these folks on the ground. When he's not talking to the folks on the ground, he's fielding questions from news media. Yesterday morning, after getting in on a late plane Wednesday night, yesterday morning he was up at 5 o'clock in the morning in his motel here doing an interview by Skype with the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, trying to tell the story that you've heard tonight. So, Amr, thank you.
Now, we'd like to open it up for your fantastic questions. We have a mic up there that you will be kind enough to come to, and or if you're near me, I can come with the microphone. Please.
Thank you. I just have one question and one comment. Why you think, why the world failed to save the human being heritage in Syria? I want to hear from you your second. How, what the world have to do to this not happen again somewhere else?
I just wanted to lighten the mood a little, and I will answer your question in a second, but because you brought up my interview at 5 a.m., I'd forgotten to ask them if it was radio or TV, and I thought it was radio. So I got up, quickly, sat in front of it in a messed up bed, and I'm just sort of, and then they said, oh, yes, can you please switch on your camera? We're ready to go. We're ready to roll in 1 minute. And I was like, ah! So if you go on their website, you'll see me, and I look terrible. So I'm not going to post that on my Facebook because my wife threatened me with terrible, dire consequences if she ever sees me again with looking, raggedy on some media. And I figured, well, it's Australia, it's far away, nobody will pay attention. Anyway, it's up on Twitter as well, I think. So, but thank you for bringing that up. Yes, and I do apologize because your question was not lighthearted. It was a very important question, and I will address it with the weight it deserves. The short answer to your question, both questions in fact, is the way to save both the people and end their suffering and the heritage that is represented there is to end the war. It's not rocket science. And right now there is no international will to truly end the war. Although, I got to tell you, once the wave of immigration and terrorism reached the shores of Europe, they're scrambling. They're trying to figure out what to do now. But come on, we told you about this. I had screaming meetings with ministers and deputy ministers in Germany, in Berlin, and in France, and in England, telling them this is going to happen. And it's not because I'm smarter than anybody else in the room, but because it was so obvious. You create a humanitarian catastrophe. You move 10 million people. Where do you think they're going to go? They'll go to the neighboring country first. They'll hang around for a year, 2 years, 3 years, and when they run out of hope, where do you think they're going to go? They're going to just sit there and wait for the world to freeze over? They're going to keep moving. And they keep moving. And it's going to get worse. So the solution would have been to prevent this from happening in the first place. And we could have done that, and I'm happy to discuss this with anybody. It doesn't have to be, there are middle ways of doing this. Preventing it from happening again, unfortunately, my friend, our history, the human history, even in just the 20th, I don't even want to go beyond it, just the latter half of the 20th century and is just filled with similar examples. I can tell you the same thing happened in Cambodia. Those of you who remember Cambodia and the Pol Pot regime. Pol Pot had exactly the same view of the cultural heritage. He publicly declared, he went up and said, this is, our cultural heritage is an exploitable resource. It is now selling it on the open market. And they went in and they ripped it out and they sold it. Taliban looked at the cultural heritage. They looted and sold, believe me. It's not something we were paying attention to. We only paid attention when they blew up the Buddhas, because they were then going into the publicity stage. ISIS did not come up with anything new here. They were just continuing the same thing. Tried and tested methods. I hope I tried to answer it anyway.
Who are the buyers?
Oh. That is the Holy Grail, madam. Who are the buyers? The buyers are many. This is a well-established pattern. This is not a new pattern. We've seen it before. We saw it in Iraq when Iraq was looted. We've seen it before when other countries undergo the same sort of disruptive, terrible catastrophe and their cultural heritage gets looted. Usually the pattern works as follows. You have a series of dealers who, some are local, some are foreign. There's a market that's immediately established for it. They buy the stuff. It almost never goes onto the open market in these early years. It goes straight from dealer to some very deep basement where it sits for 10, 15, maybe 20 years, and then it has to be laundered, it has to be cleaned, there has to be a provenance established for it, a history of selling so that you mask its true origin. And then eventually, once it's cleaned up a little, once it's lost that feel that it's fresh out of the ground, I tell you, some of the pieces we see you can see how fresh they are out of the ground. And once it takes years of sort of, storage and passing it around, eventually maybe somebody will try to sell it at a small auction just to give it a little more of a sales history, a provenance. And then after maybe 20 years, it'll show up at a Sotheby's or a Christie's in the hope that nobody will notice. And the other side of the problem is that there are no real, what's the word here? At the end of the day, what's the worst thing that could happen to you if you're an auction house and you're caught with a naughty piece like that? Just look at the most recent catches. The worst happens is you say, oh my God, I didn't realize, here, you can have it back, and you donate it back, but you've sold 20 other pieces and you got away with it, you get caught with one. For every 20 you sell, you might lose one. It's too good. And it goes on. And then there are private buyers, the same people who buy a stolen Picasso or a stolen Matisse. They know what they like, they have dealers and buyers who know that, and these people specialize in visiting conflict areas. They'll pick up whatever it is, they'll contact the usual customers, and it gets sold. And it goes straight from the ground to the dealer to the owner, and it never passes through the system. So we don't know about it. But it's a supply and demand. And the only reason why this has started to come up now is because I and a few other people came up with the brilliant idea of linking it to terrorism. That's the only reason why now people are paying attention. Until we linked it to terrorism, suddenly we turned around to people and said, hey, you realize ISIS is making a lot of money off this? And they went, we better pay attention then. And then we said, well, why don't you start kind of telling the buyers that if they're caught with one of these pieces, they're financing terrorism. Oh, this is a great idea. Yes, we think, really? Okay. Michel.
Yes, as you say, ISIS, they are good capitalists. It's part of the illegal trafficking, sex trafficking, horn of rhinoceros, ivory, etc. They are very good at that. But thank you for this realistic and very depressing. And I remember Tom Lee, Professor Lee, you were the first to bring that to one of the brown bags to our attention last fall. But you know, when things are too depressing, there's a way of that teachers we have to try to rationalize, intellectualize it, right? So yeah, it's part of history. Romans used to destroy everything, right? Second World War, French Revolution for ideological reason, and the past is bad, you know. And you know your story very well, the Spanish Revolution, 1936, etc., etc. But one thing which you said that it's mostly they destroy pagan artifacts to sell on the market, or rival or competing religious items. But there is one exception I'd like you to mention, to speak about that. I think it's Boko Haram, or the branch of Boko Haram which is active in Mali. It's well illustrated by the movie of Osako in Mali called Timbuktu. Yeah. When they occupied Timbuktu, they were harsh Muslim, they have this imaginary dimension and conception of Islam, but they started to destroy, and they didn't loot that I was selling, they started to destroy the Sufi temple of Timbuktu, which are centuries. Why? I mean, can you speak about that?
Yes, of course. And this is, look, the groups with that kind of radical ideology consider the greatest threat to them is from other religious ideologies that are competing with them. Remember, this extreme form of very strict fundamentalist, very strict interpretation of Islam comes with this essentialist view of Islam, that there is this pure essence. Sufism is a pollutant for these people. Yes, absolutely. No, Sufism is, look, to them Islam is Muhammad and the four rightly guided caliphs, and anything outside that that happens after that, they're the Scalias of Am I treading too? If it's not with Muhammad and the four rightly guided caliphs, it is not Islam for them. Sufism is exactly what they would want to destroy and uproot and burn for that reason, to purify, because they see it as a pollutant. It dulls that powerful essence. Only when they have removed that pollutant, it's like a diamond, you know, that has become dulled with age, and it needs to be cleaned, it needs to be polished, and then the true beauty and essence of that diamond will shine through. That is how they see Islam. And to them, Sufism is, as with Shiism, as with everything else, these are pollutants that are dulling that powerful essence. And until they extirpate that, until they wipe it out, true Islam cannot come back and exert itself in the way it does. That is why they do it. Anybody else?
More questions?
I think somebody's rushing down. I'll wait, don't worry.
So earlier on, off the first question, you said the best way to end this would be to end the war. What would you say is the best way of going about that?
I really, okay, I'm going to try and answer this question by, and maybe it's not a fair answer, but please take it in the spirit it's intended. You know, I had some good ideas about preventing this war from escalating to where it was. I was in Washington, D.C. at State Department in the summer of 2011 when there was the first major step in escalation beyond just shooting at protesters. Now, the army was going to be sent into the city of Deir ez-Zor, a small provincial city on the Euphrates River. And it was going to be punitively dealt with, a demonstration of the true intention of the regime that it was not going to give in to this. And it was the purpose of going in, they were going to go into that city and they were going to do terrible things to that city and its population. And they were going to send that, telegraphing it as a message to the rest of the country, particularly Aleppo in the north, telling the Aleppine merchant class that if you don't support or you don't pay enough money, or you don't continue to pay for the gangs that are being used by the regime to break up the protests and keep your kids at home, then we're going to come up to your city and do the same, and then the cost will be infinitely higher. There was a column of tanks driving down along the river, sparsely populated area, mostly steppe and desert, heading towards Deir ez-Zor. I mean, I guess I could flip a map and show you. And I was sitting in the State Department. I was having lunch with a couple of colleagues who were close to Secretary Clinton at the time, who were in charge of the... And then Secretary Clinton came and joined us. And I told her, I said, we know that the regime is testing us here because they want to know whether you're going to let them do this or not. We had already sent a very clear message to Gaddafi a couple of months before that, telling him that driving tanks towards civilian populations after he did his famous Zanga Zanga speech. And we burnt his tanks on the road to Benghazi. So all you need to do now is just remind Assad that he will suffer the same fate if he carried on that process. And Assad was waiting to hear the American response. I had a call from the Syrian ambassador, who was at the time still on speaking terms with me. And he said, are they going to hit it or not? What do you think? I said, I don't know. I will ask. And I asked, I said, are you going to let him do it? I said, one predator, madam, one predator. They moved a month and a half ago, the predators from Iraq into Incirlik in Turkey. I said, one predator, madam, one hit in front of the lead tank. They will all go home. And then he will have to negotiate. And the answer was no. And I was a little annoyed. And then later on, my friend said, don't be angry with her. It's not her fault. The White House won't do it. They've already sent a clear message. No action. As long as we have zero action, and that is what the electorate wants. When Obama says, I'm not going to do anything, he's not because as far as he's concerned, that is what you people don't want. You would be very angry with your Congress had they sanctioned a strike against the Syrian regime when they used chemical weapons against civilians. They had crossed the red line that President Obama had drawn. And President Obama was able to walk back from that line in full confidence that you would support him in that. Not you necessarily here, but the majority of the American people. The regime, I know this for a fact. After when it looked like we were going to actually do some action, I was talking to friends, colleagues, people I know in Damascus. Two things happened in the hours leading up to the supposed strike. Two things happened. These are facts. These are not fantasy. The first thing that happened, many of the regime, officers, etc., started packing their bags and leaving for their villages because they wanted to get out of the way. They thought the end was coming. The second thing that happened is on the checkpoints, people suddenly noticed that the soldiers, the paramilitaries, who are usually very rude, very aggressive with them, they humiliate them, were suddenly being ultra nice. I'm not kidding, they were being nice because suddenly they were afraid of the possibility of a strike. And then we gave it all back again. The regime knows that under this current administration, and this administration has made it very clear, no action. So I was told 2 years ago by a senior member of this administration, tell your friends in the opposition to hunker down and just survive, because this administration will do nothing. We knew that 2 years ago. And I don't want to tell you that only action is good, because action has consequences. Iraq, the action that, the invasion of Iraq had consequences. But I can also tell you inaction has consequences too. Because right now, where we are is as a result of inaction. So we have a pendulum. 1 minute it's up here, and now it's up there. We need to be somewhere down here. We don't need to be up here, and we need not to be up here. We want to be somewhere down in the middle, and we are not in the middle. I sort of tried to answer it, I'm sorry. Yes?
Is this on? Okay. So I was kind of wondering, you said that that man was chlorine gassed by Assad's military. And I'm just wondering why there hasn't been any, like, I don't know, international penalty imposed on his government for his war crimes.
Let me tell you a little story about this. When Assad the Assad forces used chemical weapons against the civilian population, the big one that almost led to an airstrike. That was not the first time. They tried it several times. The regime is not stupid. They kind of do it in increments. And they wait and they see and nothing happens. That big one was maybe the third or fourth time that had happened. I can tell you that there was one incident, because I was involved in this. We managed to gather, at great difficulty, tissue samples, samples of cloth, samples of evidence that chemical weapons were being used. And they were given to one of our guys who went to the American embassy, the US embassy in Ankara, to hand the evidence over. They would not let him in. They would not let him in. Do you know why? Because to take that sample was then to have to admit that chemical weapons were being used, to have to admit that a red line had been crossed, to have to admit that you may have to do something. And in the end, what blew the cap off that one was, if you remember, Chuck Hagel was in Israel, and one of the generals there stood up and basically said, by the way, the Syrians are using chemical weapons, and here's the evidence. And it made Chuck Hagel look really bad. I don't know if you remember that incident. It was in 2013. And it was a big scandal, and everybody got really upset, and how dare they humiliate Chuck Hagel like that. And then the regime finished it off by doing the big strike, and that was it. There was no way of hiding it. So that's why they get away with it. And believe me, they can do it again and again, and we don't want to do anything about it. In fact, right now, as far as they're concerned, chlorine gas is no longer a chemical weapon. On the current designation, check it out. It doesn't count. It's bleach. Somebody else? Oh,
Can I?
yes,
Okay.
please.
It seems that in face of Syrian crisis, the UN is not so active. I was wondering whether in the future, especially in later this year, UN can dispatch peacekeeping forces. United Nations.
United Nations,
yes.
the UN.
Is that feasible or not? Thank you so much.
If the UN wants to dispatch forces, I'm all for it. But you know as well as I do that the UN needs to be operating under international. There has to be an international agreement, and Russia has vetoed every single resolution on Syria without fail, almost. The only one they passed, I think I can't remember the number of it. There was one they let pass through recently, but any resolution that essentially they considered to be unfriendly to the Syrian regime, they vetoed consistently. And so, plus, to have a UN mandate, a UN force, the UN forces don't usually, they're not allowed to shoot. They come in to separate parties after a peace agreement has been agreed. You've got to have a peace agreement first, then you can bring in the UN. And thus far, we've not even gotten that far. There's no peace, so it's just, unfortunately, I think they're...
I was just curious, and obviously ISIS is essentially completely divorced from the idea of diplomacy, but if artifacts in areas presently controlled by opposition forces and by the government have been able to be secured to a greater degree during the ceasefire, and if the ceasefire has had a positive effect on the preservation of the artifacts that haven't been destroyed or looted thus far in the conflict.
Well, you've sort of put it right. I mean, the ceasefire has helped because when barrel bombs are not falling on monuments and museums, then that is a good thing. It also allows us to move more freely. It allows us to build on the relationships, particularly in non-ISIS areas. But I would also warn that looting goes on despite all of this. There's ongoing looting right now in opposition-held areas and in regime-held areas. I was asked yesterday in one of those interviews whether it was, would now Palmyra be safe because it was because they were hoping, right now the regime is on the outskirts of Palmyra trying to recapture the city. So the question was, if they recapture the city, would that be a good thing? Would that end all destruction of the site and its looting? And I can tell you that right now, many of the objects on sale currently from Palmyra were looted whilst the city was under the regime and not under ISIS. But that's just one of the quirks of the 5 pieces that are right now near the Turkish borders about to be sold to this German dealer. Were actually purchased from an army officer who was stationed in Palmyra. Yes.
I just wondered, from the picture up above you now, do you go in and out of Syria yourself? How do you maintain, were you in Syria there? And
Yes,
how are you regarded by the Syrian government?
Yes, I do know. I know very well. Okay. Officially, I have not been in Syria since 2010. And I would not like to comment any further on that particular side. I am a regular visitor, however, to Turkey, to Istanbul, to Gaziantep, where we have our offices, where it's usually where we meet, where we do training for our guys. And this is taken in Gaziantep in one of the hotels. In terms of how I'm regarded, I can happily let you know that ISIS put me on their list of condemned to death. I think it was in early 2014. They produced a list, and my name is on the list. The regime, the year before that, tried me in absentia and condemned me to death. So. Yeah.
Question, how do you get involved with this thing?
How did I get involved? Yeah. Well, most of these guys are either students of mine when I was their professor at the university, so they knew me that way, and later on, or they were employees of the institution that I worked for, and they were my colleagues. And so in 2012, when we started to hear the reports coming out that cultural heritage was becoming a casualty, we were all very concerned, and we started to talk to each other, thinking, what can we do? Is there anything we can help with? And it kind of grew from there. I'd already established, or was one of the founders of the Day After, and the Day After originally was intended, in 2011, after the initial furor and excitement of being part of this great sort of uprising, I suddenly realized this was, everybody was working towards toppling the regime, and it was a very crowded field, and almost everybody wanted to be involved in it. And I found myself kind of less and less able to kind of move around, and I suddenly thought, well, nobody's thinking about what we do after the regime collapses. What happens afterwards? So how about somebody starts thinking about a vision of, okay, so we got rid of the regime today, what do we do tomorrow? And so the idea of the Day After was born, and we worked on it for nearly 8 months, and then we issued a document which has since been incorporated in with the vision of the, then it was the Syrian National Council. It was been used by de Mistura, and before him, Al-Akhdar. In fact, if you look at the latest document that was produced by de Mistura, you'll see sections of that are straight out of our TDA document. That's where we are. And we then established an NGO, and that's how it went. Yes?
Back to the subject of chemical weapons for just a moment.
Yes.
In any of your conversations in Washington over the years, have you ever sensed any hesitancy on the part of our own government, hesitancy in becoming too principled about the matter of chemical weapons by Assad, given our own history of having been so complicit in helping Saddam Hussein use chemical weapons against the Iranians in the 1980s?
I don't know. Not really. I understand where the question is coming from, but I never really engaged with, let's put it this way, I was never high enough up the food chain in terms of people I'm talking to where this would sort of really have an impact. And everybody that I've dealt with, at least at the level I usually communicate at, most of these people are horrified at the fact that the Assad regime was able to get away with it and that we did nothing. And a few people, very few people that I have talked to who were against action, I'm not going to name the person, but fortunately he's no longer on the National Security, the National Security Council. But it was more about sort of, that this is not our problem, we should not be involved, rather than anything stemming out of an aversion or a concern for, use of chemical weapons for the sake of their use. It was more a case of, this is not our problem, we should not be involved in it. It was more a reinforcement of the Obama doctrine as we now understand it. I think.
Since the war in Syria has began, the West has made repeated claims that they want to remove Assad from power, and obviously nothing's been done. From your personal perspective, seeing the war firsthand, do you ever see Assad being removed? And if, should by some circumstance he is removed, what would be the best course of action by the Syrian people to establish peace in the country?
I mean, I'd like to think that history teaches us that, dictatorships do not last forever. They do have a sell-by date. They do have a, and in fact, when they reach their sell-by date, that's when they start to go off. They smell bad, and then you have this kind of disruption. Dictatorships are great because, in fact, they've been a favorite of many Western governments, including ourselves, because they're a known quantity. You have a dictator, you know the person, you're only dealing with him. You have one, there's no, if he says yes, it's yes. You remember that advert, Mr. Del Monte, he say yes. That's it. Mr. Del Monte says yes, it goes. Mr. Del Monte says no, it's a no. In a democracy, depending on what, there's a bandwidth where, you think of the French, when they didn't support us, we had freedom fries and we poured their wine down the toilet. What a waste. But there's a bandwidth. But at the end of the day, it's reasonably stable, when you have a stable change of government. The problem with dictatorships is when it goes bad, it goes really bad. It stinks up the whole place. So, and the Assad regime, at the end of the day, has reached that point. So as much as I can't tell you how he's going to be removed, but I can tell you that there is no future for that regime. It's a matter of time. It's a case of how much more destruction will this country have to bear before he's finally removed, before he's finally he's eliminated from the equation, whether it's internally, whether it's externally, whether it's with Russian help, whether it's with Chinese help. I mean, I don't know how the combination will come, but it is very clear that there is no future for Syria, that if you want to end the conflict, and the conflict is having a major impact on Europe and the rest of the world now, that he's going to have to be somehow dealt with. In terms of what is best for the Syrian people, I mean, I can tell you what I would like to see. How realistic this is, I don't know. I mean, for me, the regime has always created this binary. And from day one, they sought to essentially say, it's either us or this very extreme, horrible alternative. That it's either ISIS or Al-Qaeda or Muslim Brotherhood, whatever it is, that the bogeyman. And for them, they sought and very aggressively destroyed anything in the middle that could act as a viable alternative. And so what we need to do as Syrians now, so we need to neutralize Assad just enough so that we can allow for this middle ground to come back out again, so that it can be an alternative, so that we don't have to just look at the binary of either Assad or some extremist, lunatic, sort of fringe, whatever it is.
First of all, thank you, sir, for your wonderful speech. And I'd like to return to the subject of art. I would like to know if you've seen evidence that the destruction of heritage in Iraq or Syria or wherever it might be, have you seen evidence of this having an effect on modern artists, like modern musicians, modern poets, and other modern art forms?
Thank you for bringing that up. You know, we often think of cultural heritage, even I do that too, in terms of the tangible, the monuments, the buildings, the temples, the museum pieces, what we call the intangible heritage. But there is something equally important that is known and classified as intangible. And that includes much of what you have just described. And just think how many poets and how many musicians and how many artists and how many creative people have died or have lost limbs or have lost eyes or have become so, I don't know, changed by this experience.
Mm-hmm.
And how many children who could have grown up to be artists, singers, creative minds, beautiful writers, who now have also been completely destroyed and have losses. So the loss, the intangible loss, is probably, in the long term, far greater than the tangible I just described. And thank you for reminding me of that.
Of course. And if I may, with just one
Sure.
follow-up, do you know of any efforts to showcase or display these modern art forms, like from people within Syria? And
Yes,
can
I
you
do.
speak to that, please?
No, certainly. There are plenty, and there are several. I seem to remember there was one young man who was doing something specifically on modern art and, how to bring that out. And he was doing a very nice project in California, not far from here. I know there are a number of other efforts in different parts of the United States, and I know there's plenty of, there's a couple of organizations working with refugees trying to sort of revive, to bring back, and to get children engaged again. Recently, one of our guys did a brief workshop with children in one of the camps, one of the refugee camps. And what they did was they got the children, I should have put a picture of that, they got the children to draw from memory, each one of these kids, wherever they came from, what cultural heritage, what buildings or monuments they remember from where they came from. And so kids drew the Temple of Bel if they came from Palmyra, kids drew the big water wheels if they came from Hama, they drew the Citadel of Aleppo if they came from Aleppo, and it was quite remarkable. It was a beautiful experience. There's a lot of that stuff going on, and there are plenty of organizations, I believe, working on this kind of stuff.
Hi. You were very kind to Ms. Clinton about her complicitness in this, saying that she was just doing the best that she could.
I didn't say that, by the way.
Well, you were alluding to that. It was more diplomatic than that. But do you feel that with the regime change in this country that we will become a more humanitarian version of what you would like to see, or do you think that those people in Syria are just going to have to keep hunkering down?
I don't know the answer to your question. I mean, all I do know is that if we have more of the same, in terms of the same policy continuing, then the suffering will continue. A change in the new sort of president of the United States, if it's Clinton on the Democratic or I mean, we sort of know what Bernie wants. So, Bernie would be bad. Bernie would be more of the same. I can tell you now. He's already made that clear. In fact, one of his biggest supporters in Hawaii, what's her name, Tulsi, has already said that she wants to go and kiss Assad on the cheeks. So we know where that one's going. As far as Clinton is going, all I do know is that she was, one of the reasons why she resigned or she walked away from the State Department is because she knew she was going to clash with the White House, and she needed the White House for her next run. And I know that from people close to her who told me that back then. Whether she will do something, who knows? That's to be seen. And as for Trump, oh. I'm not even going to, I have no idea.
That was a very diplomatic answer. Thank you.
Hi, I would like to thank you first for sharing this with us. When I heard about all our artifacts being smashed, I was completely devastated. I love history, and yeah. I would like to know, what is your plan for after the war does, if it does end, what your plan is to restore the cultural heritage?
You want me to, after saving, you also want me to restore it?
Well, what are you going to do?
Lady, have mercy.
Well, I know what you're going to do.
Hopefully there's going to be another generation. Oh, I don't know about that, but hopefully there was. It's a very nice question, and thank you. My kids miss me. I don't see my kids anymore. I barely see my wife. This takes a lot of my time up, and I would like to hope that once this is done, that I can go back to a more normal life, go to bed at a reasonable hour, wake up at a more reasonable hour, and not forget to put my clothes on because I got confused whether it's a,
No response. Well, maybe not you personally, but your organization. Do you guys have a plan for?
I think, I'm sorry, you're absolutely right. Look, if the war ends, there is a state institution, the DJM, the Department of Antiquities. That would be their job. And hopefully the many men, women who worked in that institution before will continue to work again, and hopefully there will be a new generation that will also get trained and will continue their work. They've done great work in the areas that are under their control, just as our guys have tried to do the best they can in the areas under their control. And I suspect it will be down to those people to continue it. And they are the real heroes of this story. Do not forget this. If I leave you with anything tonight, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not the hero here. These are the heroes. These are the heroes, not me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Not him. No, I'm fine. If you want more questions, I'm free. I'm here till 4 a.m.
Quick comment, to be fair to the Obama administration. In 2014, Kerry and the Russian, there was an agreement on this gas except chlorine, you're right. They were destroyed, to be fair, so the audience doesn't think the West didn't do anything, right? The chemical weapons were destroyed.
So why do they keep using them?
Well, that I don't know.
But because they're not destroyed. They're still there, please. Michel, it's a great agreement between the Russians and everybody came out smelling of roses, except for the Syrian people who got...
Chlorine was not part of the deal, but the chemical weapons were destroyed. There was...
Yes, some of them were destroyed, not the entire thing. You go back and read the message. The whole thing was not destroyed. They still have chemical... And look, destroying the chemical weapons is not enough. They still have the know-how.
Oh, yes,
okay, well, so they can make more, and they are making more. They are making more. It's nonsense. It's a cop-out so that he didn't have to act. It was Putin saved his popo.
Thank you all. Thank you all so much. Please give our speaker a big Montana. Thank you. Thank you.
MashaAllah.